What's a creepy fact you learned that instantly made you question reality? Story one, I'm curious if anyone else has had this happen. Years ago, my then wife and I would run into the same woman everywhere we went, and I mean everywhere. This went on for about a year. Go to the grocery store, she would be there shopping. Starbucks? Yep, sitting right behind us. Walking around the mall? She would pass us walking in the other direction. Movie theater? She'd be behind us in line getting popcorn. The creepiest encounter was while driving on the freeway. My wife looked at the car next to us and screamed, "Yep, it was her." She was always alone, never talked to us, and always made eye contact. She had a very unique appearance. She was very tall, very thin, and had very tight skin on her face. It was so unusual that we joked that we were being studied by an alien. It was some serious glitch in the Matrix stuff. Story two, you know those fun universe animations that start out with the Earth? Or maybe something on Earth, then zooms out bit by bit, comparing us to something larger in the universe. Then it keeps going. You can't see the Earth anymore, but you can focus on the sun. But then the sun is gone, and we're still getting smaller because we haven't gotten to the biggest object. Smaller and smaller and smaller. We barely even exist. But I complain about the drive to Dallas. Story three, I learned that lobsters can theoretically live forever. And now I'm questioning why we're not all trying to unlock the secret to lobster immortality. I've opened up a couple lobsters after they have sat in a hot bath of water, and all I have found was some delicious meat. I've added some melted butter to see if that brings out any more insight, but so far it only makes the meat more delicious. I will continue my studies, but I only expect savory results. Story 4, that we had thought before we had language. I've been thinking about this one a lot. I have a daughter who is 7.5 months old. She definitely doesn't understand language yet, but there is still a lot going on in her head. She recognizes things and is clearly capable of manipulating her environment. And I'm constantly wondering what her stream of consciousness is like without thinking in words. But we will never know because by the time she's old enough to actually articulate her thoughts, it will be too late for her to remember how her consciousness worked before she understood language. Story 5, that there is no way to know for sure if you and any other person sees the same color when looking at the same thing. I've had this thought for a while. If I may expand, we can all agree that 450 nanometers wavelength is blue. That's something that can be empirically measured, and blue is what we agreed to call it. However, our perceptions of what 450 nanometers looks like is purely in the brain's processing. It could be a uniquely individual thing. If my brain suddenly switched to perception as someone else does, the world might seem very different. 450 nanometers would still be called blue, though. Story 6. My physicist husband claims that there are differently sized infinities. Apparently, a lot of mathematicians think that too. How? Perhaps this will help garner some intuition for why there could be infinities of different sizes. Two types of infinities are countably infinite and uncountable infinity. Something is countably infinite if you can arrange all its elements in a list. For example, the set of integers is countably infinite because we can list them as follows: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Perhaps a better name for this type of infinity is a listable infinity. The set of even numbers is also countably infinite, as is the set of odd numbers, and the set of prime numbers. Think about how you could list these. So in some sense, your intuition is correct in saying these are all the same kind of infinity. Story 7, the double slit experiment. Even when you slow the experiment down so that it's only a single photon, electron, etc., being measured, you still see the interference pattern. Unless you put your detector behind the slits, then it's a solid set of two lines behind the slits. It's almost like the universe is rendering itself differently based on observation. Story 8. I read somewhere that we can only see about 0.03% of the electromagnetic spectrum, meaning we're practically blind to most of what's going on around us. It made me question how much of reality is hidden from us, existing beyond what our senses can perceive. Another one that shook me was learning that trees can communicate with each other through underground fungal networks, sharing nutrients, and even warning each other about threats. It completely flipped my understanding of forests. They're not just a collection of individual trees, but more like an interconnected community working together. Reality suddenly seemed a lot more complex. Story 9, it is literally impossible to describe in words what quantum superposition is. Everything you've heard about quantum superposition is, at best, sort of right, but also a lot wrong. But we don't have a way to describe it properly, so those half-assed Schrodinger's cat, both and neither at the same time, etc. Explanations? Just stick around, because without understanding the math, you just can't understand quantum superposition properly. Quantum reality is simply that different from macroscopic reality. Our intuition cannot comprehend what is happening. I do not understand quantum superposition, and unless you're a theoretical quantum physicist, neither do you. And some of them don't. But we know it's real. It happens. It affects reality. We cannot convey what is happening with words. That messes with me so hard. I think the best interpretation would be to think of the universe as a giant, open-ended, and infinite game of 20 questions. In the normal game of 20 questions, the person answering has a particular thing in mind that the guesser is trying to guess. But a different way to play is that the person who answers doesn't actually have a particular thing in mind, and they answer randomly, yes or no. As they randomly answer questions, the space of possible things that the thing could be shrinks, and with enough questions, the thing would be resolved into existence. And you don't get 20 questions, you get infinitely many, or at least as many as you can accrue in a lifetime or in a civilization. Story 10, light doesn't experience time. From its departure from a quasar on the far end of the universe to a sensor on a space telescope that was built a decade ago, the journey took almost the entire lifespan of existence. And yet, as far as the photon is concerned, the trip was instantaneous. If that wasn't wild enough, here's the real brain bash. There's no such thing as a free photon. They only exist as a carrier for energy exchange between electrons. For a photon to exist, it has to have a sender and a recipient. Two electrons separated by the entirety of space and time somehow agreed to exchange a photon. That's not quite true. Free photons can and do exist. They are force carriers, as you said, for the electromagnetic force. And billions of photons are being emitted and absorbed because of this all the time. However, there's no need for some sender-receiver pair to be pre-decided upon in order for a photon to exist. Fun fact that I love. Photons that have been around since relatively shortly after the Big Bang, the cosmic microwave background, or CMB, were discovered in the 1960s by two guys who thought for a bit that the noise in an antenna might have been due to bird poop. Story 11. Apparently, schizophrenia can hit anyone at any time, and using psychoactive drugs significantly increase the chances of you getting schizophrenia. To keep a long story short, it isn't a stretch to say that most religious and philosophical figures of our past were probably schizophrenic, since many religions and metaphysical questions before science were based on visions, voices, and generic signs of whatever sparked their tirades. Makes me wonder a lot about how reality and unreality are just a matter of perception. Story 12. One fact that often blows people's minds is that the universe is constantly expanding. What blows my mind about that is that they say that the expansion of the universe is faster than the speed of light. So, unless we develop faster than light travel, there will always be exponentially more universes than we can explore. Even if we do develop faster than light travel, and we assume that the universe is expanding at the same rate in all directions, we still won't ever be able to explore the entire universe, because by the time we explore what we can reach, there will be exponentially more universes than when we started. Story 13. Human comprehension of reality is so far from accurate, it is functionally useless. Every understanding, scientific discovery, whatever we make, is at best just us trying to make things make sense to us. But humans simply don't have the brain power and hardware to come anywhere close to an actual understanding of reality. It's like an ant walking on an iPhone. Its brain can process things like, this surface is smooth. There is no food here, and that's about as complex as it can get. But that's nowhere near the level of complexity of the iPhone itself. Story 14. Not really a fact, but a feeling. I was raised in a religious setting, so the question became, if God made everything, who made God? I used to spiral into these thoughts like, how does the universe exist? Where did everything come from? How is it possible to exist? Nothing can exist. I eventually learned about dimensionality and stuff, and put it to bed with the fact that whatever the answer is, I have no capacity to understand it anyway. I made God. We made the gods of Olympus, the god of the Roman pantheon, all the way back to cavemen. They had a god for everything. The monotheistic belief in a single deity is fairly known. Humans have existed for at least 2 million years. The oldest bone of a human was dated at over 2 million years. It was the arm bone of a young girl, found in Africa. It was actually found by the archaeologists or anthropologists' dog on the last day they were going to be in the area. They were taking the dog for a walk and letting him run around. He ran off and dug up this bone. Story 15, that UFOs or UAPs are acknowledged by the US government, and Congress is currently debating legislation about whether or not to declassify information related to them that has been kept hidden by top-secret defense programs since 1947. All of this being spurred by multiple whistleblowers whose information was recently leaked by the Inspector General's office, making astonishing claims under oath before Congress, such as exotic, not of this earth, materials being in the possession of defense contractors, and even more incredibly, that non-human biological material has been recovered from crashed UAP. All of it seems unbelievable and very well might be complete nonsense. But the attitude of our elected officials, who have been privy to more info than us, screams to me that there's more to it all. Story 16, if you had a really long stick that connected to the moon and you pulled the stick, the other end of the stick wouldn't move instantly. It would take as long as it takes for the speed of sound traveling through wood to reach the moon from Earth for the other end to move as a result of your pulling the stick. I think the thing that gets me about this is I knew everything I needed to know to reach this conclusion on my own, but I'd literally just never thought about this specific hypothetical before. And when you actually write it out like that, it feels so counterintuitive, even though I intellectually understand all the component pieces that make it true. Story 17, The Birthday Paradox, is a fun one. I wouldn't say I questioned reality as I'm a math nerd, but it's fun to share with people who aren't so inclined. For those unaware, it deals with the probability of two randomly chosen people out of a larger group of people having the same birthday, and that you only need a room of 23 people for that probability to be greater than 50%. 50 people, and it becomes 97%. To explain a little further on why this ends up seeming so surprising and impossible for most people when they first hear this, it's because people often confuse the premise of probability that two randomly chosen people share a birthday with probability that one other randomly chosen person shares my birthday, which is not the same calculation. Story 18. Almost everything you see, hear, and read every day is engineered so that you will see it, not random, to make you feel like you formed opinions, wants, and thoughts yourself. And once you start getting into content planning, SEO, advertising, brand management, etc., you start to realize that it's all manipulated. I cannot begin to express the extent to which everything is manipulated. Awards, information, culture, diets, how you feel about yourself, what you think you should spend money on. That company or brand you see in all the good publications, paid for, not earned. Nothing is earned anymore. It's manipulated and paid for. Focus on truly cultivating peace of mind outside the realm of brands, consumption, advertising. Story 19, that a large percentage of people don't actually have an internal voice. Some research suggests it's between 30% to 50%. A lot of people don't realize they don't have it because they still have an inner voice, but it's just imagery, not actual voice. For instance, one subject did all the same tests in inner voice. It wasn't until the researcher gathered more info that they found out this man's under voice was just colored shaped. The man thought this was normal as his brain deciphered these shapes the way our brain does with the actual inner voice we have. So basically, there's millions of people who are asked, do you have an internal monologue? And they all answer yes, even though it's non-auditory. Story 20. Some physical experiments, mostly double slit experiment. If electrons fly through two very narrow slits and you measure where they impact on the wall behind those, you get a waveform interference. If you measure through which slit the electron flew, you have completely random impacts on the wall behind. It is mind-boggling to me. It cannot be explained by anything you experience in everyday life, and you just have to accept the facts that result from them because you cannot verify them with your normal experience as a human. Quantum mechanics sometimes makes me think we only see a tiny part of reality, and there is a giant realm of stuff we just can't perceive. Also, sometimes I question reality because stuff happens that feels like it revolves around me personally way too much to be random. But those thoughts are most likely just me being a bit paranoid. Story 21, lemmings have been widely believed to exhibit herd mentality, following each other off cliffs in mass suicide. This was such a widespread belief that a famous video game during the 90s was based on this concept. However, this is a myth, and the root of the myth is even more horrifying. It stems from a Disney documentary in 1958 called White Wilderness, which, incidentally, won an Oscar, in which a famous scene depicted a large mass of lemmings throwing themselves off a tall cliff to their death. This was later, through another documentary, proven to be a misleading and factually inaccurate scene arranged by the crew. What actually happened, the film crew, desperate for a memorable moment, flew lemmings out to a filming location in Canada and repeatedly threw the lemmings off the cliff to capture the moment. The film insinuates that this was a breed of lemming known for mass migration, flinging themselves into the Arctic, when in fact, it was a different breed of captive lemmings, being abused by film crew and thrown into the Bow River in Canada. Story 22. Does money really make people happy? Money doesn't buy happiness, but poverty buys a lot of misery. Yes, having enough money to buy new tires for your car without worrying what it will do to your budget, or knowing you can put your kids through school without sacrificing your retirement, or pay whatever bills might pop up that are unexpected. That reduces a lot of stress in life and increases happiness. Beyond that, there might be marginal gains, but being comfortable definitely makes people happier. There was a study done in the 70s and early 80s to determine what brings happiness. According to the study, and borrowing from a historical figure, young people are happier than old people, rich people are happier than poor people, healthy people are happier than sick. So basically, the government spent tons of money to find out that people prefer to be young, wealthy, and healthy as opposed to old, poor, and sick. Story 23. I saw a person walking instead of running ahead of me in the heavy rain. I was trying to get to my car. It was really weird that they were just walking in the rain ahead of me in the first place, totally drenched. Then it was like they split into two people, with one of them running off towards a different area of the cars. I freaked out right as I slipped on the water and fell real hard. Then I was in the front seat of my car, soaking wet, doors closed with my head and my hands still stinging from the fall. I probably just fell and stunned myself and don't remember the actual walk to my car. But that one always stuck with me. Story 24. Most know the speed of light cannot be exceeded, but what many don't know is that it cannot be exceeded from any frame of reference. To give a parallel example, if I'm walking by you at 5 miles per hour and you're walking toward me at 5 miles per hour, we are approaching each other at 10 miles per hour. If two beams of light are going toward each other at the speed of light, they are not approaching each other at twice the speed of light. Basically, they slow down relative to each other as they cannot exceed the universal speed limit. They would not slow down relative to a third party observer, though, who is only measuring the speed of any one of them. Story 25. The Flat Earth Movement. When I first heard about it, I thought it was just like an internet joke, I guess I would say, and I didn't pay any attention to it because I just thought it was people being silly. Then a couple years later, I saw some guy was going to launch himself out of a cannon or something. So I read up a little more about the flat earth and I couldn't believe what I read. The idea that this is real to some people really scares me, earth shattering stuff. There's parts of my brain that still can't accept that people actually believe this. Sometimes I still feel like I'm missing the joke. It's very unusual for me to feel this way. Story 26. Our lives themselves. Think about how nearly impossible it is that we each individually are here and in this time. So incredible it is that many of us take the extreme narcissistic route to question whether it's all real. I can't feel anyone else's pain, feel their thoughts, and once they're out of my view, I can't guarantee they haven't evaporated to return when we meet again. The construction of the human body is so complex that there isn't a way to explain how it works and repairs itself. Enough to drive one mad were we to think too hard on it. Story 27. The Romans figured out how to make heated floors. Central heating sounds like a modern invention, but apparently it's been around for 2,000 years. I think a lot of people fall victim to thinking that we, collectively, are more intelligent than people from thousands of years ago. Modern humans, that's us, came onto the scene like 40,000 years ago, and they are no different from anyone living today. Story 28. It was years ago when I was about 17. I'd gotten home from school and wasn't feeling well, so I spent the rest of the day just laying on the couch. By about 8 p.m., I was feeling even worse and decided I should just try to sleep whatever it is off. So I go to my room and get in bed and pass out pretty quickly. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I suddenly woke up in my pitch black bedroom and all I could think was, I'm going to die right now. My body was so weak, the room was spinning and my body felt like it was on fire. I look over to the edge of my bed and sitting on the edge is my grandmother, who died just a few months ago. She pats my arm and says, "It's going to be okay. Just call for your dad. Try it. Call for your dad." So I started calling for him, and it felt like an eternity, but he finally burst through my door and asked what's wrong. I look over and my grandmother's gone. After that, he gets me up and takes me to the ER, where I have a fever of 106 Fahrenheit, which explains a lot. I had to get a ton of fluids and a shot in my hip, but I eventually felt okay-ish. Her being there felt so real. It was so weird. I know logically she wasn't, but it felt so real. That sort of messed with me a little. I loved her dearly, and her death was very sudden. We kept her ashes in a nice urn in the house under a painting she had done herself. When I got home and passed by, I said thanks to her. I know it was the fever melting my brain and maybe some sleep paralysis, but it still made me question the afterlife and those sorts of things. Story 29. When I was 12 or so and still living at my parents' house, I woke up in the middle of the night to pee. I got to the bathroom and heard what sounded like a party going on downstairs. Laughter, music, the sound of glasses being knocked together for a toast. The whole shebang. I thought it was weird that my parents had friends over so late and hadn't told me, but I decided to go and see who was there. Opened the door to the kitchen, and the entire downstairs was completely dark and silent, not even a TV on. I was thoroughly confused, but the strangeness of the situation didn't really register, so I never told anyone. Years and years later, I mentioned this to my dad, and he said he had heard them too. Turns out there used to be a small public bar in their home, which is over 150 years old. I guess some of the patrons decided to hang out for eternity. Story 30, and it's not even that creepy, but the first time it happened was the first time I've ever considered that anything supernatural might be real. Very occasionally at my desk at work, I hear breathing in my left ear. There's a wall behind me, a window to my left, but you can't hear any outside noise. I don't feel a breeze or anything. I just hear it. It's peaceful and sad, like a sigh. My first thought was air conditioning, but it's such a clear sound that just cuts through everything as if it's coming from a whole different world to the general office noise. It's very definitely only in my left ear, and I never hear it anywhere else. Every time it kicks in, I very calmly just get up and leave my desk for 5 minutes. And when I come back, it's gone.